Hitanshu? Hitanshu?
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. Uh,
Hitanshu.
yeah. Hello, guys. So sorry, I think I was on mute. I I end up doing this a lot of times. So yeah. So good evening, guys from India, and welcome to this exciting session on frugal innovations and marketing. I end up doing this a lot of times. So yeah. So good evening, guys from India, and welcome to this exciting session on frugal innovations and marketing. I end up doing this a lot of times. So yeah. So good evening, guys from India, and welcome to this exciting session on frugal innovations and marketing. I end up doing this a lot of times. So welcome to this exciting session on frugal innovations and marketing. I end up doing this a lot of times. So welcome to this exciting session. I end up doing this a lot of times. So yeah, I guess now it's fine. It should not echo. I think there was a video which was not put on mute, so it was echoing. So yeah, sorry for that, guys. So yeah, so welcome to this session on frugal innovations, as I said. And so this is sort of an on-demand session, as we got a lot of requests from our learners that they wanted a session from Professor Jaideep. So we asked Professor, and it was very kind of him to take this as always. So yeah, okay, I won't take much time. So yeah, one thing which is that Professor would be actively, as you must be seeing, that Professor is already active on chat. So he'll be keeping this very interactive, and he'll be asking questions and be telling you guys to answer on chat, and we'll be seeing your responses. So please be attentive, and I'm really sure that you'll be attentive because it's a very exciting session. So yeah, so that's it. Be attentive. Be attentive, active on chat also. If you're not able to see the chat window on the right hand side of your screen, you need to log in to your YouTube account through your Gmail credentials, and there will be a chat window which will be available on the right hand side, wherein you can answer and post question answers, whatever. So okay, over to you, Professor.
Can you hear me? Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Hitanshu, can they hear me?
Professor, not able to hear you actually.
Okay.
Yeah, now it's fine.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry about these hiccups here, but hopefully you can all hear and see me. Hitanshu, I don't know if they can see me because I only see
Actually,
you.
your screen is sharing, so that's why they are able to see me itself. If you stop sharing your screen, it will be visible.
Okay, I see. This is not ideal. Okay, anyway. So let me just say before I get started, let me say a little bit about myself. And then we can talk about what I wanted to share with you during this session. So my name is Jaideep Prabhu. I am a professor of marketing at Cambridge Judge Business School, and I have spent maybe about 25 years working in a university in business schools in the US, in the Netherlands, and here in the UK. I have spent my career studying innovation. In the first part of my career, I studied innovation in large Western corporations because the understanding was that's where innovation happens. And then in about 2008 or so, I became interested in innovation in emerging markets like India, to some extent China, some other Asian economies, African economies, Latin American economies. And when I started to look at innovation in these emerging markets, I found that their approach was different from the approach that you see typically in large Western corporations. The approach was much more frugal and much more inclusive. So I want to talk a little bit about frugal innovation in emerging markets, but I also want to talk about frugal innovation and marketing in developed markets, because that this phenomenon of doing more and better with less has also spread to the West. And in fact, it is a global phenomenon. So, with that background, I'd like to get started. I'll share my screen, so that probably means you won't be able to see me. However, I will keep the session very interactive, and from have questions for you, where I hope you will respond in chat, and we can discuss that way. So I'm going to share my screen now, and you will see some PowerPoint slides. So here goes. So the session is about how to do more and better with less. Start us with a case. Case is one of the largest technology companies in the world. It's been around for over 100 years. Very rare to have a company dominated markets globally for so long. And GE produces medical devices, for instance, amongst other things. So now this case is about when GE went to China. So as the slide says, GE dominates the global market for a particular type of medical equipment called digital direct X-ray, DDX. And GE uses this DDX technology for high-end applications such as heart scans, for instance. So when they entered China, they took these machines, which are extremely expensive, and they may have dropped their price a bit, but they were selling these in China for $150,000. Now, what happened was very soon a Chinese competitor called Zhongqing Medical obtained this DDX technology or something similar to it from its parent, Beijing Aerospace, and it took this technology and applied it to everyday applications like chest x rays. So, what they were trying to do was take high technology, which had been applied by GE to the high end. Zhongxing took that high technology and applied it to the mass market. So, when you apply something to the mass market, you immediately get economies of scale, which can help you to reduce your price. So, that's one thing they did. But they didn't stop there. They also re engineered the technology, and they built a machine for a fraction of the cost of the GE machines. Their machines were $20,000. Okay. Uh, but also, because they knew the Chinese market, they actually developed the machine specifically for the hospital systems in China. These machines that they developed also suited the existing hospital systems. So the result was they had a better product at a fraction of the cost, and you can imagine the result. They essentially took 50% of the Chinese market, and Zhongqing is now expanding into overseas markets. It's the largest in Asia. So the question I have for you, and I would like you to send your comments in, if you were working for GE, what would you advise GE to do? So that's my question to you. Think about it, and please send me your messages in chat. I'm going to now go into the chat window to see what your responses have been.
Professor, you're on mute.
So I can see your chat. Lots of great suggestions here. Um, cut prices, acquire Zhongxing.
Professor, you're on mute.
So I can see your chat. Lots of great suggestions here. Um, cut prices, acquire Zhongxing.
Professor, you're on mute.
So I can see your chat. Lots of great suggestions here. Um, Okay, let me come back. This chat is not doing a good job here, but hopefully you can hear me because for some reason it's echoing. Let me go back to screen share and let's proceed. I think you gave lots of options, lots of great suggestions. Let's have a look at what actually happened. So Hitanshu, can you now see and hear me?
Yes, yes, Professor.
Okay, so let's just step back and think about innovation broadly. So if we think about innovation broadly, you could think about several activities that are involved with innovation. You have to be inspired to get an idea. You have to then develop that idea, and then you have to commercialize that idea. And each of these activities can be performed either in a developed market context or it can be done in an emerging market, as you see in this diagram. Now, for most of the 20th century, as it turns out, the pattern of innovation activities was like this. That is, typically the ideas were inspired by developed advanced economies. That's where all the big companies were and the labs were. They would develop them. And then that's where all the rich people were. So they would be commercialized there. Only after that would you see perhaps a trickle down of those innovations economies. So, that happened for pretty much the whole of the 20th century. Then in the 1990s, you started to see a bit of a change. So, for instance, you saw something like this with Indian IT outsourcers, which pioneered a new trajectory of global innovation. So, what happened there was you had the ideas were coming from developed economies, the companies there got the ideas, but then they would outsource some of the development to emerging markets offshore to places in India. And then they would develop that idea and commercialize that idea in the West. Now, these companies come up with solutions faster and cheaper. Now we see that there is an even newer reverse innovation. Emerging markets are growing so fast, and because you have both multinationals and domestic companies in these emerging markets, a lot of ideas are being inspired in emerging economies, developed there, commercialized there, and then they are going back to the West. So we call that reverse innovation. A lot of these solutions, these innovations are frugal. They are very cheap, relatively speaking, and sometimes they can be developed very fast. They are of pretty high quality, and so they can then be commercialized in the West. Now, that sort of has been going on, but so also we're seeing that even in the West now, companies can do things faster, better, and cheaper. Now, these are typically not the big established companies like GE or Siemens. These are typically smaller startups, often digital startups like WhatsApp. So, all of you probably use WhatsApp. In India alone, there are something like 200 million people who use WhatsApp. Um, this was built by 4 people in 1 year. These guys had knowledge of technology. They could program. They saw that lots of people have smartphones. People are doing SMS texting, but lots of other things on the phone they could use to do more sophisticated messaging. Like you could take your audio and video, you could add more people, and so on. So they said, why don't we join all those dots and create a software, an app, which would go on the smartphone, and they called it WhatsApp. They built it in about 12 months with very little seed funding, only about a quarter of $1 million. And then they launched it, and very soon they had millions, hundreds of millions of people around the world using their app. Now, let me ask you a second question. Suppose you are in Google or Vodafone or Facebook or Apple. What should you do when WhatsApp develops this solution faster, better, cheaper? So I'm going to go back into chat. I'm going to mute my, I'm going to stop screen. I'm going to mute. Well, I'll just stop screen share. Hopefully this is not going to cause problems. I think the mute is causing, it's causing an echo for some reason. I don't understand. Maybe I'll have to unmute. Problems. I think the mute is causing. Okay. So sorry, everyone. I unmuted because otherwise there is an echo when I get into the Google Hangout. So hopefully you can hear me now. I saw all your comments. There were some great suggestions as to what Facebook, Google, etc. should do in response to WhatsApp. Um, so they could do all kinds of things, a bit like G. But in fact, you know what happened? Facebook actually acquired WhatsApp for $20 billion. And there are lots of reasons why Facebook did that. So now we see there is yet another global trajectory for innovation, which is you can have frugal innovation in the West, where the ideas are developed in the West, and then there is commercialization immediately both in the West as well as in emerging markets, like it happened with WhatsApp. So now, what I want to do in this webinar is I want to give you some ideas about how you can frugally innovate in the 21st century in two cases. One, if you are working in large multinationals like GE, whether you're working in developed or emerging markets, and two, in startups like WhatsApp, whether you're working in developed or emerging markets. So I want to give you a sense of how you would do that if you're in a large company or in a startup. So let's start with emerging economies. Okay. And let's start with an economy like India. So when you go to a country like India, you might see innovations that you see in Western countries, but you may also see particular types of innovations specifically for the Indian market. So typically, when we think of Western innovation, we may think about something like this as an innovation. So this is a high-end fridge. This will talk to you, and you can talk back to through this tablet PC. And for that, you pay about $3,000. Now, this is a bit of a caricature, but you often see this in Western companies. They typically have these long term projects where they invest in technology for the sake of technology. This is quite expensive. So then they put this technology in their product and because they have to sell them, and because they have to charge them for it. Now, you may see some of this in India, but you're also likely to see something like this. So the Zippo fridge is $30,000. This fridge on the right hand side, the Mitti Cool, is $30. It's a clay fridge. It just uses the cooling properties of water that is stored in the reservoir at the top to not only keep that water cool, but when it evaporates through these walls, it keeps fruit and vegetables fresh for up to 5 days. Now, I want to ask you a set of questions here. Please respond in chat. So the question is as follows. Difference in the two design principles. How are these two products responding differently to consumers? How are they incorporating consumer insights differently? What is their target market? What are they trying to achieve? So do send me your chats. I'm going to mute my phone, otherwise it's going to cause problems, and then I'll come back. Okay, I'm back. I got lots of comments from you. So let me now go back to screen share, and let's have a look at another example. So you gave me lots of ideas, lots of comments that the Zippo fridge is for the high end. The Mitti Cool is for rural markets, low end consumers who may not have access to electricity. Also, one point that perhaps people didn't bring up, which I'd like to emphasize, is this fridge is often this kind of a product is more technology push, whereas this is more market back. Here, they're identifying a need and then developing a solution according to that need. Here, the technology is, in a sense, dictating the product features. Let me give you another example of contrast. Okay. So here is a product that you might typically see from a large Western corporation. This is an incubator. It is a beautiful machine. It has all the bells and whistles from a company like GE, but it's about $25,000. Now, you may see something like that in India, but you're equally likely to see something like this. This is about $100. Now, it's not an incubator, it's a baby warmer. It doesn't have the oxygen tent and so on that this has. But it is designed to address a large part of the problem that the incubator is addressing. The problem being infant mortality, where in many rural markets, rural communities, people may not have access to these very expensive incubators. Even if somebody gave them those incubators, they may not be able to maintain them or have access to electricity. And infants who are born 1 or 2 weeks prematurely would otherwise die or be very badly affected. But this warmer will save them. Now, uh, interestingly, also another fact here, this incubator was developed by GE. The baby warmer was actually developed by 4 students at Stanford. They took a course called Design for Extreme Affordability, and the objective was to come up with a working prototype that is 1/100th the cost of the existing solution. They could take any problem, and these students came up with the one of infant mortality and the warmer. So, again, let me ask you, what is the difference in the design principles between these two products, the incubator and the baby warmer? Okay. Again, wonderful comments from everyone. Really interesting. Many were saying the difference is one is need based, one is technology push. Um, some people were talking about being more of a frugal, perhaps affordable. Roland talked about another GE product called the V-Scan, which is a very interesting substitute for very expensive kinds of like ultrasound, etc. So I think you're getting the hang of it. You're seeing that frugal innovation is about market back. It's about needs, meeting unmet needs, usually very basic needs, often for very large numbers of people who are relatively low income, maybe in areas where affordability and accessibility is a problem. So that's really how you see frugal innovation in emerging markets. And in India, when you ask people how they would describe this, very often they use the Hindi word jugaad. So my co-authors and I wrote a book about this phenomenon, which we called jugaad innovation, and we defined this approach as the art of overcoming harsh constraints by improvising an effective solution using limited resources. So here the emphasis is not on perfect solutions, but good enough solutions. and the emphasis is on using resources that are relatively limited and maybe available in your context. Now, interestingly, when we published this book, a lot of people wrote to us from other parts of the world saying they had something similar in their country. So, for instance, Brazilians said they had two words to describe something similar: Gambiara and Jeitinho. They captured different elements of Jugaad. And in fact, our book was the first translation was in Portuguese for Brazil. We discovered that in Africa, in Swahili, there is a word called kanju, which kind of has a similar implication. In China, there is a similar word. And also, you see equivalents in the Western world, like DIY, system day, and so on. So, what we did in this book was we looked at a lot of cases, like the baby warmer I told you about, like the Mitti Cool fridge. We looked at lots of these types of innovations developed by people in villages, developed by people in cities who are maybe have a more technical background, by domestic companies like Tata's and multinationals like GE. And we tried to identify what were the principles driving these innovations. And we found there were six principles that seem to drive this kind of frugal innovation in emerging markets. So, first of all, these people are very good at doing more with less. They are adept at uh, using the resources they have to replace or substitute resources they don't have in their solutions. Second, their solutions are very simple. This is important because by keeping the solution simple, you are able to economize and do more with less. But you also ensure that more people can adopt and use it. Third, they are very good at lateral thinking. So the idea is if they cannot climb the mountain, they find a way around it. The fourth principle is they are often inspired by adverse circumstances. So necessity is the mother of invention. Their adversity actually gives them ideas to innovate. Very often, their solution is meant for people who are otherwise not the focus of companies. People who are in the informal economy, people in rural markets, or people in urban slums. And these solutions are not only meant for those people as consumers, but also involve those people as part of the solution. I'll give you some examples. And finally, these people, these frugal innovators, are very passionate about what they're doing. They follow their heart. And this is important because what they're doing is quite difficult. So I'll give you some examples and then I'll ask you to tell me what principles are driving it. So here's one example we cover in the book. This is Mansukh Bhai, the person behind the Mitti Cool fridge I told you about. Um, he comes from a village in the Indian state of Gujarat. He has a high school education. He comes from a family of potters. In 2001, there was a very serious earthquake in Gujarat. A lot of people lost their household possessions, including the clay pots, the matkas in which they store water. And one morning, Mansukh Bhai said he opened the local newspaper and he saw a picture of a fridge, a picture of a matka which was broken. And the caption read, "Poor man's fridge broken." And that broken pot actually gave him the idea for a clay fridge, which you see in front of you. So he designed this himself. He set up a factory in his village. He trained local women to make these fridges in his factory. And then he began to sell these fridges, including on the internet. So I want you to think a little bit about this clay fridge. And I want you to tell me which of these six principles do you think were involved in that innovation? Do more with less, keep it simple, think and act flexibly, seek opportunity in adversity, include the margin, follow your heart. So take some time and send me your chat, and I'm going to stop sharing. I'll have to go through this again. Okay, I'm back. I saw lots of comments there. Some said, three or four. Some said all six. And I think, in a way, I would agree with those who said all six. Um, he got the opportunity or the idea for it in adverse circumstances. He um, The solution is very simple. He's doing more with less because he uses clay and water. There are a lot of lateral thinking, improvisation involved. He includes marginal groups, not only as consumers, but also as employees. And he's very passionate. Now, one of you, and I've forgotten who it was, but one of you raised this question of, oh, Jugaad, is maybe there's creativity, but it's also become associated with non-performance. People cut corners or shoddy products. And I would agree that yes, it can also, these shortcuts can also be applied in negative ways. People are trying to avoid doing things in a proper way. It can be used by criminals and terrorists as well. So I accept that. But I think I would focus on how it can be used to do good, how that ingenuity can be used to improve quality and reduce price at the same time. Now, let me just turn to an example of a large company doing this, because you see lots of entrepreneurs doing it. And I think the point about things being shoddy or maybe not scaling is true when it's done at a very local level. But now we see large companies also getting in on the act. For instance, perhaps the best known is the Tata Nano, where Tata Motors developed a highly affordable car meant for people who are otherwise using two wheelers. So, to get those people into the formal economy and improve their lives. And they work backwards again from what price they thought would be needed to sell this product in the marketplace. So Ratan Tata would observe people when he was driving to work. He would see a lot of people on two wheelers. It would be two adults, two or more children in very bad circumstances. And he said, we can maybe help them by coming up with something which is affordable. And people in a press conference then asked him, how much would this car have to sell for? And he said, 100,000 rupees, about $2,500. And then a small team within Tata's was empowered to do this. They did a lot of innovations, including process innovations, product innovations, and came up with this product. So let me ask you again, which principles do you think were involved with the Nano? Which of these six principles do you think were involved with the Nano? So do send your chats in. I'll stop sharing again. Okay, so thank you again. I saw lots of great suggestions. Again, people, some said all six. I think you could probably see elements of all six, but particularly do more with less. Keep it simple was involved. There was a lot of improvisation, certainly include the margin. Ratan Tata personally was very passionate about this project. So elements of all were involved. Let me now turn to what multinationals were doing. And remember, I asked you this question about what GE should do in China when it faces Zhongqing. And many of you had suggestions like, they should cut price, they should acquire Zhongqing. So here is what GE has decided to do long run. So GE has its largest R&D center outside the US in Bangalore in South India. And there they have been developing medical devices for the rural Indian market, where they know that a lot of doctors have to go from the city to the countryside on day trips. They cannot, obviously, the rural hospitals cannot afford the big ECG machines that are designed for city hospitals, because those cannot be carried by the doctor in a bag. They needed to develop something that was highly affordable but also portable, that would fit in a doctor's bag and that would run on batteries. So they knew what it should look like, right? And you can see that there's a kind of a diagram or picture of the product. But they went one step further and they said, let us approach the process of innovation in the way our Chinese and Indian competitors do. Let's do this kind of market back kind of approach. So we know what the device should look like. So instead of doing everything in house from scratch, where we design and develop everything ourselves and then own the intellectual property, which is expensive and long, kind of time consuming, let's do what Indian and Chinese competitors do. Let's see what components we can take off the shelf. So, for instance, if we need a printer, there are bus ticket printers. We can take that component. If we need a keypad, we can take telephone keypads, that component. So, in this way, they took off the shelf components, they cut and pasted them. They applied a quality control standard, and they had this product faster, better, and cheaper. Was launched in India, did very well, then launched in China, did very well, and now it has FDA approval and it's being sold in the West. So you see lots of these kinds of examples. Siemens also has a very large R&D center in Bangalore, and they are also developing frugal solutions there, such as this device you see to monitor the status of the fetal heart. Typically, in the West and in big hospitals in India, you would use ultrasound, where the equipment is extremely expensive. You require a technician highly trained to maintain it. Here, they have developed a substitute product, a frugal product, which uses microphone technology. It's much simpler, much easier, and doesn't need an expert technician. In fact, Siemens now has gone on to develop a whole suite of products that they call smart products, which they define as simple, maintenance free, affordable, reliable, timely to market. Some of these are for B2B customers, like in food processing or in engine parts. And these products are now being sold globally by Siemens. So we ended up writing that book called Jugaad Innovation about companies, what companies from the West going to countries like India and China could learn from their from these emerging markets to compete in emerging markets. But that book came out in 2012, and after it came out, we realized there was a lot of interest in frugal innovation in the West for the West. So we started to look at that phenomenon. And what we're seeing in the West now is that small teams can do things that only large companies or the government could do 10 or 20 years ago. I gave you the example of WhatsApp. Here's another example. This is a company called Design for America. Four students from Northwestern University in Chicago. When they graduated, one was an engineer, one was a business person, studied business, and two were designers. And they said, if you want to solve big problems, you don't have to go to Asia or Africa. There are many in the US, like this problem of hospital acquired infections, which kills 100,000 people every year and costs the industry a lot of money. So they said, how can we, four of us, address this problem? So they were all from Chicago. They went to their local Chicago hospital. They talked to doctors and nurses. They observed them. And very quickly they realized, well, these doctors and nurses obviously want to be hygienic, but there are many moments in their day when they cannot go to a wall unit to dispense the cleaning gel. So they went back to their studio, small room where they have computing equipment and a 3D printer, and they brainstormed. So they said, what would the kid do? Well, the kid would just wipe his hands on his trousers, right? So why don't we do something like that? Take the gel, the dispenser from the wall, and have it clip onto the doctors and nurses' scrubs, so they can wear the dispenser, and when they're walking, they can dispense it. So they got that idea, and then they developed the prototype that you see in the bottom right. It's called Swipe Sense. They developed that product they prototyped it in their studio with that computing equipment and 3D printers. Then when they had to manufacture it, so they outsourced the manufacturing. They didn't have money to support them, so they crowdfunded the money. They didn't have an advertiser to advertise it, so they used social media. And finally, they didn't have a sales force to distribute it. So they just listed it on Amazon and sold it that way. So you see, the whole process of coming up with the idea, developing it, and then commercializing it could be done by 4 people who have access to all the tools needed to do this process. Now, we have very sophisticated computers which are connected, which we carry around with us. This company, Cellscope, which came out of UC Berkeley, spun out of there, has developed a whole series of medical devices which fit into the audio jack of your smartphone and leverage the computing power and connectivity of the phone. So this one here you see is an otoscope. It can be used by a mother to take very high resolution pictures of the inner ear of her daughter if she has an infection and send them immediately to a specialist who is somewhere else remotely. This device is a fraction of the cost of the standalone device, A, and B, it also enables the patients to be involved in their healthcare. It can be used more preventatively, and it also empowers them to do telemedicine. So you can see that now small teams can do amazing things to do things better for less. This is a 3D printer. Now these are increasingly available to people in households. This one is about $200. So that's within the reach of many households, not only in the West actually. But even if you cannot afford a 3D printer to own it yourself, you can go to spaces, common spaces, which are called tech shops in the US, or they could be called fab labs. There are about 500 fab labs around the world, including in countries like India. They're called make spaces here in the UK, in Cambridge, where I teach. In the heart of town, there is a maker space where a lot of our students go. And for a monthly fee, you get access to a whole bunch of tools: laser cutters, 3D printers, circuit board printers, and so on. And you can tinker and come up with prototypes. And importantly, you also get access to a community of like minded tinkerers and makers. And you can get insights and feedback from them. So you may remember I told you about these 4 students at Stanford who had this course called Design for Extreme Affordability. And they decided that they were going to come up with this a baby warmer. So they had to develop a working prototype. To do that, they went to the local tech shop in Palo Alto. They had this idea of a blanket that the mother could carry the baby in. But the blanket is not enough. You need something that can keep temperature fixed. And they didn't know how to do that. But in the tech shop, they met a guy who was a former NASA scientist, and he told them about these phase change materials, these waxy substances that can be heated by electricity or water and will keep temperature fixed for a period of time. So they developed this pad, which is a key feature of this product. Without the pad, this would not work. This is Jane Chen, one of the members of Embrace with Obama when he was president, and you can see that he is supporting these kinds of solutions. In fact, Obama hosted a Maker Fair in the White House in 2014, where he celebrated these kinds of technologies and these kinds of solutions. And you can see why. He says, today's do it yourself is tomorrow's made in America. That by stimulating this kind of approach to manufacturing and innovation, you could revitalize many of the cities that had been which had a lot of manufacturing, but old style manufacturing. You could do new style manufacturing that was more high value add and more innovative. So as I was saying earlier, you now in the West have the opportunity to come up with ideas, develop them, and then commercialize them simultaneously in developed and emerging countries, because the approach is fundamentally frugal and often is digital. so you can roll out the solution worldwide for a large market around the world. So the last part of this webinar, I want to talk about, I give you lots of examples of entrepreneurs doing frugal innovation. I want to talk about what this means for large companies, especially in the West, but globally, I would say. How can large companies do frugal innovation? So after we wrote that book, Jugaad, we wrote a follow-up book called Frugal Innovation, which came out in 2015, where we focused on frugal innovation in the West for the West. And we looked at what large companies are doing in this area. And just like the previous book, we looked at lots of examples and we extracted some principles that were driving these large companies. And these are the 6 principles. So let me talk a bit about them. So the first one is engage and iterate. This is something that you see a lot of startups doing. There is this idea of the lean startup, where you start with a minimum viable product that sort of solves the problem of a particular user. You present that minimum viable product to the lead user. The user uses it. You get quick feedback, and then you improve the product in that way. So now companies, large companies, are trying to do that lean startup. They're trying to create that kind of engine within them. Companies like GE are doing that. Then the second was flex your assets. So this is where a lot of companies have a lot of assets, but a lot of these assets lie idle, physical assets, logistics. So the question is, how can you make better use of your assets? Also, your human assets. If you look at R&D, how are your teams organized? Can you make your teams more nimble, like they would be in startups? Create sustainable solutions. This is where you try to reduce your environmental footprint. In that way, you reduce your waste and you develop better solutions for less. Often, your customers can be educated to do more with less with your product. Help them to make better use of energy, water, etc. in the home. Nowadays, we see a lot of consumers who we call prosumers. These are people who are more actively involved in the economic process. So people like the makers I talked about, who are actually getting into production and entrepreneurship. But you also have people who are trading on digital platforms, Airbnb or peer-to-peer lending and so on. So the large companies can co-create value with these prosumers. And finally, they can partner with other innovative companies. Particularly if you're a large company, you can partner with innovative startups. So let me give you some examples and then I'll ask you which principles apply. So this is the case of Intuit, a software company founded by Scott Cook, who you see here. And he had this idea of developing software for people to do accounting in their home. If they had accounts that they had to keep, either because they had a small business or just their home finances, he said, I'll develop software. He called it Quicken. And he realized when he developed this is now about almost 20 years old, he realized at that time people had PCs at home and so on, but the software he was developing was competing effectively with paper and pencil because people would be keeping their accounts with paper and pencil. So he realized his software has to be as easy to set up and use as paper and pencil. Now, he said, how can I do that? So what he would do was, when he first developed his software, which would come in CDs at that time, it would be sold in places like Staples, outlets. He used to go and hang out there and he used to see who's buying my software. And if somebody bought his software, he would go to them and say, do you mind if I come back with you to your home and see how you are setting up this software? And so I can get some insights into what are you finding easy, what are you finding difficult, and then I will incorporate these ideas. And that would then be incorporated, those insights would be incorporated into design, and he would rapidly improve his product. And this approach came to be known within his company as Follow Me Home. So let me ask you now, in this example I just gave you of Intuit, which of these principles of frugal innovation were involved? Engage and iterate, flex your assets, create sustainable solutions, shape customer behavior, co-create value with prosumers, or make innovative friends. So which of these do you think is most prominent? Okay, I saw lots of comments there. Great comments. People had, some said one, five, three. Some said all six. So let's go back and let's have a look. So I would say that clearly there's engage and iterate, because he is asking people who are buying his product, the lead users, can I come and watch how you're using it? Based on the insight, I will improve. There is an element of shaping customer behavior, because by designing things in a certain way, you are influencing how they will use and install your product. And there's certainly an element of co-create value with prosumers. So I would say those are the main ones. Okay, here's another example. This is a French company called Target. They make flooring. They make not they make all kinds of indoor flooring, carpeting, all those kinds of things for offices. They also make things like astroturf and so on for fields, for playing fields. Um, Now they, like many companies, were part of what might be called a linear economy, where companies take raw materials from nature, they convert those raw materials into products like carpeting. They sell it to companies or people in homes. People use them and then dump those things back in nature, in a rubbish dump. Now, they say this is very wasteful, right? One way to do more with less is to go become a circular economy, where instead of dumping stuff, you reuse, recycle, and reduce as much as possible. So you're in a perpetual loop. And they have a very ambitious target. By 2020, they want to be a fully circular enterprise. So everything in their products will be reduced, reused, recycled by 2020. And they realize this is not only a technical challenge, it's also a business challenge. For instance, this will mean they are not simply selling transactionally their products to customers, they will be leasing, renting a service to people. So if you're a business buying from them, you'll be buying a service where they will maintain your flooring, but they will have control over the physical material, and they will decide when to replace what. They will only replace the parts that get worn out more often and things like that. So let me now ask you, Tarket, which of these six principles of frugal innovation do you think Tarket is involved with? Engage and iterate, flex your assets, create sustainable solutions, shape consumer behavior, co-create value, make innovative friends. Okay, lots of suggestions. Let's have a look again. And here's what I would say. So, first of all, clearly number three, create sustainable solutions. I would say also flex your assets, because they will be reusing a lot of their physical assets in particular. There's an element of shaping customer behavior, because you have to get customers thinking more like a service rather than a product. I would say those are the three main ones, but there may be elements of others also, like engage and iterate. Here's another example. This is GE. So we have lots of GE examples. GE has set up a website called First Build, and you can check it out. So what happens on First Build is there's a community of people. You can be part of the community. And GE issues challenges to us on a regular basis. So for instance, here's a challenge called Indoor Grilling Challenge. Design a kitchen appliance that brings outdoor grilling indoors, and you could win up to $2,500. Okay. Now you can submit your solutions. Many people submit their solutions, and then GE will evaluate them, and then the winner gets up to $2,500. Okay, and they incorporate those ideas into their product. And then they have others like the micro kitchen challenge. They can have all kinds of challenges. Okay, so with that example, which of these principles do you think was involved? Okay, lots of suggestions again. Let's have a look. So I would say this one certainly is co-creating value with prosumers. So there are people who are actively involved now in the economic process. They GE is trying to engage with them on digital platforms, and through that process, they are developing faster, better solutions. So it's definitely co-create value. There may be an element of make innovative friends in there, and of course, some of the solutions could be creative. There's an iterate as well because you are engaging with consumers early on. Two more examples, and then we'll conclude. This is Ford. I remember, you recall, I mentioned these spaces where you can tinker and meet other people and develop prototypes. So Ford in Detroit, they partnered with Tech Shop, and they said, "Can we send our R&D people to Tech Shop to play with the community one afternoon every week?" So they did that, and they found in 1 year that people were not only more motivated, they also came up with higher value patents in this process. So that's an example of what Ford is doing. Which principles do you think are involved here? Which of these six principles? Engage and iterate, flex your assets, create sustainable solutions, shape customer behavior, co-create value with prosumers, make innovative friends. Okay, lots of solutions coming in. So let me say what I think is going on here. So first of all, again, it's co-creating value with prosumers, because in these tech shops, you will see other people in the community and you get ideas from them. There's an element of make innovative friends. I would also say this is flex your assets, because you're taking your human assets, your R&D team, and you're taking them outside that context. You may think actually this is going to reduce productivity, but actually this increases productivity. It increases the creativity of their solutions. One final example, this is Barclays in London, big bank. They have realized, like a lot of big banks, that they have lost contact with their retail customers. They used to have that contact, high touch banking in the bank branch when people went in, but now fewer and fewer people are going into bank branches. Bank branches are being closed. There are fewer personnel there, but they realize that they have a lot of data on us, and they have data on all our purchases, where we are buying stuff, how much we're spending, and they have data on lots of other people. So they could use that data, like Amazon uses our data, to give us recommendations which on how to use our money better, and send those recommendations to an app to us, like, oh, I saw you spent a lot on coffee. If you stop spending so much on going to Starbucks, you could maybe save so much every week, and that may help you with your mortgage, for instance, things like that. So they realized they could develop these solutions But they realized they could do this in house. They have lots of money, they have lots of technical capability, they have the people, but their structure is very hierarchical. It's a very big organization. There are silos that don't talk to each other. And also, the mindset is very risk averse. They're focused on complying with regulations. And in London, they're surrounded by a lot of fintech startups that are actually doing things very fast and cheap. So they said, why don't we join them? So they've partnered with a company called Techstars, which set up a very big space for Barclays in London, called its accelerator. It's called the escalator, actually, Barclays escalator. And every 3 months, they house 10 top fintech startups there. And these startups are accelerated for 13 weeks. So during those 13 weeks, the startups are building their solution, developing the business and technical bit, and they are mentored every week by people in the main bank. Now, this helps the startups because they don't have a lot of knowledge of banking and customers and technology. But it also helps the people from the bank because suddenly they realize what are the possibilities of doing things faster, better, cheaper. And at the end of 13 weeks, these startups pitch to the large company's investment team. And then the investment team can decide whether to buy these, incorporate them into the business, or just invest in them, or pass them on to somebody else. So, with that example, let me ask you a final question. Which of the six principles do you think Barclays is engaged with? Engage and iterate, flex your assets, create sustainable solutions, shape customer behavior, co-create value with prosumers, make innovative friends. Okay, so let me say that here I would say the main principles are really five and six. Make innovative friends, particularly large companies with startups like fintech. There's some element of co-creating value with prosumers because these companies, you could say these startups are prosumers in some way. You are engaging and iterating, and you're flexing your assets. Now, let me just conclude. I would say that based on my work, large companies these days, whether they're from the West or emerging markets, they struggle with doing things faster, better, cheaper. They generally tend to have bigger budgets and they're generally expensive in their approach to innovation. So they need to learn how to do more with less. They also need to be agile, learn how to be agile. They're typically very siloed, hierarchical, a lot of process, they're very slow. They need to be doing things faster. And they're generally quite secretive. They only involve the R&D people in innovation. They don't even involve other people in their own organization, let alone people outside the organization. So three things that I would suggest that large companies can do to solve these problems. They can give their employees time and space to experiment, like Ford is doing with Tech Shop in Detroit. They can engage with agile entrepreneurs, like Barclays is doing with fintech startups in London. Or they can create this jugaad mindset by engaging with emerging markets, like GE and Siemens are doing. Now, what if you work for a small organization? Your problems are almost the opposite because, in fact, you don't have a lot of resources, so you have to do more with less. You don't have a lot of processes and structures, so you can be very agile. But often the problem is you can come up with a solution, but then you may have difficulty scaling it, really commercializing it, because you may not have the sales force, advertising budgets. And this is where large organizations can help because they have those resources. But then you have to learn as a small organization how to partner with large organizations. And that is a bit of a challenge. So let me just conclude by saying that based on my work over the last 2 decades or so, I really believe the world needs this kind of frugal, flexible, and inclusive innovation. I think that emerging market firms can gain by engaging with Western economies and vice versa. And I would say that large and small firms can work together to improve lives everywhere. And just to remind you what I was trying to do, I was trying to help you if you're working in a startup to get a sense of the tools that will help you bootstrap your limited resources and achieve scale. I'm hoping that you can see that even as a small startup, there is a lot you can do today. You should be confident, and that you need to have a certain amount of discipline that can drive your success. This is linked, some of the things I've talked about are linked to lean startup, design thinking, business model innovation. If you work in a large company, I hope I've given you a sense of how you can impress management with how to do things faster and cheaper. So, on that note, I'll stop and I will take any comments or questions that you may have for the last few minutes. Okay, so some of you have asked if we can share the materials. Absolutely. I can pass this on to Hitanshu and he can share the PowerPoint. Um, Somebody asked, what is the sixth principle? Is make innovative friends. That's what Barclays is doing with fintech startups. Um, let's see. Roland, thank you for your kind comments. Um, Vibhuti says, do these Jugaad innovations, are they sustainable with time? Is the life cycle of these products bankable enough? Great question. Um, if they're developed by startups, they may not have the resources to sustain them. But this is where, if they can be partnering with large companies, then you could have sustainability and long-term scale. Tata Nano was not a big success. Great point. I didn't mention that. And it goes to show that even if a large company does it, it's not success is not guaranteed. So Tata's, I think, had a great idea. They executed the idea very well, but still failed to scale it. And there could be many reasons for this. I think one was they got the positioning wrong. They focused on what they call the world's cheapest car, but even poor people are aspirational. They want a high quality car. They don't want the world's cheapest car. So the positioning may have been wrong, and that's a very marketing issue. And also, the challenge is it's not just developing a car, a good car. You have to also do financing. So they had to get into financing. So these innovations are not simple. Even large companies may struggle to scale them. It takes time and patience, and it requires, I would say, holistic innovation, not just product innovation. I think about business model innovation. So Ayan asks, for startup diagnostic centers, what can be the best frugal marketing tactic? So I take it these are medical diagnostic centers. What are frugal marketing tactics? I think in general, whatever you're doing these days, the best way to to do marketing is to be in close touch with your customers, and the best way to do that is to be in touch with them digitally. So you are constantly collecting data on them while you are doing service for them. Very much like you would see with all these digital companies like Facebook, Amazon, WhatsApp, etc. Or I gave the example of Barclays and fintech. So you want to set up a digital aspect of your service is being delivered to your customer digitally, and as part of that you're collecting data and getting insights on them which you can act on to. So that's the key to doing frugal marketing, is be digital. Roland asks, with more and more disruptions, where do you see frugality will be evolved to? Great question. So hard to say, but we're seeing so many different technologies coming on board. All these technologies offer the promise of reducing costs for innovation. So I would say that could be through things like blockchain. You could see obviously digital, just more digital on digital platforms, analytics. These are AI. AI is the obvious one. Machine learning. These are going to be massively disruptive around the world. Aparna asks a great question. If India is the birthplace of Jugaad innovation, why is it that India still ranks low in the World Innovation Index? There are two answers to this question. One is a lot of people still think that innovation is about inputs, about R&D and spending and patents. And the World Innovation Index heavily weights those aspects. Now, that is those things like R&D are at best inputs. You can spend a lot on R&D, you may not get a great product out of it, as a lot of companies and countries find. And that's a much more risky way. It's a more high risk, high return approach. In a country like India, you could argue that's not appropriate. You can do that. I'm not saying you can't do that. You have, of course, Mangalyaan. You have lots of some of those types of innovation. Companies can spend more on R&D. The Indian government can spend more on R&D and do more of that high tech innovation. But I would say that a lot of what India needs at this point are these kinds of frugal market back innovations to meet basic unmet needs of people in an affordable and accessible way, often using things that they already have, like mobile phones, texting, and so on. So you can do digital banking, for instance, and we're seeing a big ecosystem develop through mobile payments, through digital signatures, digital wallets, digital ID, thanks to things like Aadhaar. So I think India should actually be higher on the World Innovation Index, not because it spends more on R&D, it doesn't, it should, but because there's much more to innovation than simply spending on R&D and patents. Okay, here's a great question. Another question from Aparna. What do you think can be done to have an innovative mindset and culture? So I've spent a lot of my career studying that topic. That's another webinar. Maybe the next webinar could be on that. A few years ago, I did a very large study, the largest of its kind, with two of my co-authors, where we studied over 4,000 companies in 17 countries, both developed countries and emerging markets like India and China. And we identified what were the three attitudes and three practices. And that's really what culture is, attitudes and practices. The three attitudes and practices uh, that separate the most innovative companies from the least innovative companies. And some of them are like thinking about the future. Most innovative companies spend time thinking about future customers, competitors, and technologies. They're also willing to cannibalize their current products with new products. They take a risk, a gamble with new products. They're willing to take calculated risk. They have product champions. They empower people throughout the organization to take up new ideas. They incentivize people who are innovative by rewarding them. They do not punish failure, and they use internal markets. So that's a very quick summary, but perhaps, as I said, we could do an entire session on that. People are still brand loyal. Where do you see markets for such small players? I'm not quite sure I understand that. People are certainly brand loyal. Oh, I see. Okay, if people are brand loyal, what is the hope for small players? That's a good question. I think people are less brand loyal now. Increasingly, we are seeing that people will switch, whether they are in affluent economies or not. People will switch to a better product that's more affordable and more convenient. This is why you're seeing digital giants emerge very quickly in a very short period of time. Take WhatsApp, replaced SMS texting because they give you a better experience without it being more expensive. See what Amazon has done to the big retailers. So I think you can overcome the disadvantage of not having a big brand by being agile, smart, and frugal. Do something better for customers, cheaper for them, and they will switch to you and you will build your brand. Can Indian startups build global companies with local innovation? Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are examples in India of companies that have been born global. They developed some kind of digital solution from day one, and from day one, their first customer was global. If you think of Infosys, it took them a while to get to where they are. That's an example, but you have many other examples. So thank you, Vibhuti. Thank you, others. Many others have said you like it. Sorry about some of the hassles with the sound. I was trying to work it out myself. Abhilash says you cannot create a system to be innovative. Innovation happens based on the situation and necessity. If you have a unique problem, the new age tech world is giving you that opportunity these days. Absolutely. But I would say you can develop a system that takes time, and that's the job really not only for individual companies and startups. That's the job for the government to do. But if you are working in a startup or a company, the new tech, especially digital tech, you really need to develop, as Greek I gave you examples of. Kushal, maybe we'll take one last question. Can India emerge along the lines of China where innovation find better opportunity to scale up? That's a good question. I think India is catching up with China. We're still maybe 5 to 10 years behind them in our development, partly because they opened up faster. If you look at where India and China were in 1978, they were more or less the same level GDP. And then China opened up to foreign direct investment and became the factory of the world in the 80s. India missed that opportunity. In the 90s, India opened up, became the back office, but India missed the manufacturing opportunity that China got. And that was a big boost to the Chinese economy. And now China is the world's leading manufacturer, and that helps them a lot with particularly product technology innovation. So they're doing a lot in areas like semiconductors, in making things like drones or high-speed trains. These are areas where India has lost out a lot of opportunities because India didn't open up early trains the size of companies because of very restrictive labor laws, very protectionist laws. So India has a lot of scope, but I think India missed some opportunities there with we didn't open up fast enough. Okay, I think maybe Hitanshu, we should stop there. I think we are out of time. You've asked me some amazing questions. I wish we had more time. There are a few I have not been able to answer, but thank you for being so interactive. Sorry about the hiccups there. I was just trying to figure out this system. I created some hassles or problems by not muting the right microphone, I think. But hopefully, you all enjoyed the session and found it valuable. Please do stay in touch. I will send you my handouts through Hitanshu. Hitanshu, over to you.
Thanks a ton, Professor, for this session and taking out time on a Sunday. And thanks a lot, guys, for joining in and being so interactive throughout the session. We received a lot of responses from you guys, and also I am pretty sure you guys loved it as we have been seeing great response on the chat. So thanks a lot, Professor. Have a good day. Looking forward for the next session.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye bye.